Have you ever felt insignificant, as if you were just one of many, with no voice, no power of choice, just going along with the flow? Sometimes it feels like we're just small pieces on an immense chessboard, where others decide the rules, dictate the direction, and run the game. But if life were a game of chess, which piece would you be? The king, who moves little but needs to be protected at all costs? The queen, powerful and versatile? Or the pawn, the smallest and most underrated of the pieces? Dostoevsky wrote that the secret of human existence lies not only in living, but in knowing what one lives for. Perhaps therein lies the deeper meaning of being a pawn, understanding that even the smallest of moves can carry a transformative purpose. In chess, the pawn is often ignored. Its movement is limited, its value is the lowest in the game, and yet it holds one of the greatest powers, that of transformation. If it has patience, if it continues to advance with strategy and courage, it can reach the last square on the board and become any other piece, including the queen, the most powerful. This teaches us something profound. It doesn't matter where we start, but the direction in which we go. The pawn is a living metaphor for persistence. It doesn't impress with its strength, but with its commitment to constant progress. And that is often more valuable than any sudden genius. But how many pawns actually make it to the end of the board? Most are sacrificed along the way, used as a shield to protect other pieces considered more valuable. This also happens in life. How many people have their potential wasted, used only as a support for others to ascend? We live in a world that idolizes those already at the top, the powerful, the influential, those with visibility. But what really changes the game is not just those who were born with privileges, but those who, despite facing all the limitations, keep moving forward, step by step, with patience, with awareness, with resilience. If chess is a mirror of life, then the pawn teaches us that every advance matters, even if it seems small. Each choice can be decisive. Each silent step can transform an entire destiny. But can we see our own value? Or are we stuck in the idea that we only matter if we're big, shiny, if we stand out in the eyes of others? The truth is that most of us feel like pawns at some point, limited, ignored, surrounded by greater forces. And yet, within everyone, there is the potential to become a queen, a potential that can only be revealed with strategy, persistence, and the courage to move forward. The appearance of the pawn is deceiving. He looks weak, but he is essential. It doesn't jump like the knight, nor does it cut wide diagonals like the bishop. It doesn't dominate columns like the rook, nor does it have the freedom of the queen. His advance is rigid, only forward, one square at a time. And yet it is he who starts the game. It is he who opens the way, who protects the bigger pieces, who enters the battlefield first. Ultimately, the pawn is the silent soldier who carries the weight of the war on his shoulders. Sun Tzu said in The Art of War that all war is based on deception. The pawn is a master of this, underestimated, ignored, but capable of turning an entire match. In the right hands, it is the key to victory. And there's an even more important detail. The pawn can never retreat. His moves are definitive. It can hesitate, it can wait, but it cannot go back. This makes it a piece that requires thought. A rash move could doom him, and this is one of the most powerful lessons he offers us. In life, we don't always get a second chance. That's why every decision must be made with awareness. Moving forward on impulse can put us in danger, but when we walk carefully, even the smallest choices can take us a long way. The pawn reminds us of something essential. Even when everything seems limited, even when we feel we have little room to maneuver, there is always a way forward, a possible advance, a subtle movement, and that step, however small it may seem, can be the start of a major transformation. In chess, there is a powerful concept called the passed pawn. It's that pawn which, over the course of the game, has managed to advance without encountering any direct resistance in front of it. There are no enemy pawns in the adjacent columns that could prevent it from continuing to the end of the board. This pawn, often ignored in the early stages of the game, becomes a silent and constant threat. At first glance, it still seems fragile, vulnerable, almost harmless. But as it advances and the opponent realizes that it can no longer be easily stopped, the passed pawn becomes a piece of incalculable value. Because if it reaches the end, it can be promoted to a queen. And at that moment, everything changes. This image is a perfect metaphor for life. How often do ordinary, discreet people who have no visible support or prominence become the ones who have the greatest impact on the game? Napoleon Bonaparte used to say that victory belongs to the most persevering, and he was right. It's not just about talent or starting position, but the ability to keep going even when everything seems to be against you. The pawn that keeps going, despite risks and limitations, represents the essence of silent persistence. The great chess masters know this. José Raúl Capablanca, the Cuban world champion, was known for his brilliant simplicity. He didn't need flashy moves to win. He just needed to understand the strategic power of each move. In many of his historic games, Capablanca used simple pawn advances to destabilize complex positions, forcing mistakes in his more prepared opponents. He saw pawns not as disposable, but as the backbone of his plan. And this teaches us a fundamental lesson. Small advances, when well thought out, have the power to unbalance even the most rigid systems. In life, this translates into seemingly small decisions, which, when added together, define who we are and where we are going. It's easy to overlook habits such as reading a few pages a day, saving a little each week, or discreetly practicing a new skill. But it's these small steps, repeated with discipline, that build a silent revolution. The pawn, then, is no longer the weakest, but the most strategic. It symbolizes something much greater, that it doesn't matter where you start, but how you continue. You don't have to be imposing to be decisive. You just need patience, foresight, and the courage not to give up halfway through. In chess, there is a powerful concept called the passed pawn. It's that pawn which, over the course of the game, has managed to advance without encountering any direct resistance in front of it. There are no enemy pawns in the adjacent columns that could prevent it from continuing to the end of the board. This pawn, often ignored in the early stages of the game, becomes a silent and constant threat. At first glance, it still seems fragile, vulnerable, almost harmless. But as it advances and the opponent realizes that it can no longer be easily stopped, the passed pawn becomes a piece of incalculable value. Because if it reaches the end, it can be promoted to a queen. And at that moment, everything changes. This image is a perfect metaphor for life. How often do ordinary, discreet people who have no visible support or prominence become the ones who have the greatest impact on the game? Napoleon Bonaparte used to say that victory belongs to the most persevering, and he was right. It's not just about talent or starting position, but the ability to keep going even when everything seems to be against you. The pawn that keeps going, despite risks and limitations, represents the essence of silent persistence. The great chess masters know this. José Raúl Capablanca, the Cuban world champion, was known for his brilliant simplicity. He didn't need flashy moves to win. He just needed to understand the strategic power of each move. In many of his historic games, Capablanca used simple pawn advances to destabilize complex positions, forcing mistakes in his more prepared opponents. He saw pawns not as disposable, but as the backbone of his plan. And this teaches us a fundamental lesson. Small advances, when well thought out, have the power to unbalance even the most rigid systems. In life, this translates into seemingly small decisions, which, when added together, define who we are and where we are going. It's easy to overlook habits such as reading a few pages a day, saving a little each week, or discreetly practicing a new skill. But it's these small steps, repeated with discipline, that build a silent revolution. The pawn, then, is no longer the weakest, but the most strategic. It symbolizes something much greater, that it doesn't matter where you start, but how you continue. You don't have to be imposing to be decisive. You just need patience, foresight, and the courage not to give up halfway through. Even so, the pedestrian's journey is marked by sacrifice. Most don't make it to the end. Many are abandoned, captured, used as a distraction or a shield to protect more noble pieces. This is also common off the board. Those at the bottom, who support the systems, who do the invisible work, are almost always the first to fall. But even in this sacrifice, there is a lesson. Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist who survived the horrors of the concentration camps, wrote that when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And that's exactly what the pawn does. They can't change the rules of the game, but they can change themselves. The pawn's greatness lies precisely in this ability to adapt. If he reaches the endgame, he can be promoted to any other piece, usually the queen. This means that, despite its initial limitations, the pawn carries within it a hidden potential, often ignored even by those who move it. But getting there isn't easy. It requires courage, attention, and a strategy to protect them from the dangers along the way. Few make it. Many stop first. Some hesitate too long and miss the window of opportunity. Others move forward with determination, but encounter resistance, opposition, and roadblocks. Still, there are those who persist, and it is in them that the real strength of the game and of life lies. Because true transformation doesn't happen all at once. It is built up over a journey full of obstacles where every move counts. And every choice, even the smallest, can become the beginning of a new reality. Think of Abraham Lincoln, who faced electoral failures, personal difficulties, and countless defeats before becoming President of the United States and changing the course of history. His journey is an example of someone who started out as a pawn, isolated, underestimated, but who never stopped moving forward. In chess, there is a figure that represents this trajectory very well: the isolated pawn. This is a pawn that, unlike the others, has no lateral support. It is alone. Without protection from neighboring pawns, it becomes vulnerable, easy to attack, and difficult to defend. And yet, in certain circumstances, it can be precisely this isolated pawn that forces the opponent to reorganize, to worry, to make mistakes. In life, we are often that isolated pawn. When we follow a different path than usual, when we make decisions that distance us from the majority, when we pursue a dream that few understand, we end up distancing ourselves from the support ranks. And it is in this isolation that we often become more fragile, more susceptible to discouragement, doubt, and fear. But it is also in this space of solitude that real growth takes place. When we have no one by our side to protect us, we are forced to develop our own strength, clarity, and resilience. And that transforms us. On the other hand, the pawn also teaches us about strategic sacrifice. In countless games, a position is won not by the direct strength of a rook or queen, but because a pawn was sacrificed at the right moment. It served as bait, as a distraction, as a break. The pawn opens the way, breaks down defenses, forces the opponent to react, and in doing so, allows another piece to finish the move. In other words, the sacrifice of a pawn can be the smartest move of the game. This leads us to reflect on the sacrifices we need to make throughout our lives. How many times do we have to give up something comfortable in order to achieve something greater? An entrepreneur who decides to leave a stable job to build his own business. An artist who leaves the traditional path to follow their vocation. An athlete who gives up parties, pleasures, and comforts to train every day. These are the pawns who sacrifice themselves for an idea, for an ideal, for a goal. Nietzsche wrote, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger." The pawn, fragile by nature, could give in to pressure, give up in the face of difficulties. But he doesn't. He moves forward, one step at a time, facing risks, knowing that each move, however small, brings him closer to his transformation. In chess, it's easy to admire the queen's brilliant moves or the bishop's surgical precision, but it is the pawn's silent advance that often sustains the whole structure, because he is the only one who doesn't retreat. His nature is to keep going, even when everything is against him. In the game of life, many believe that you have to start big to win, but the truth is different. Many of those who have reached the top started out as pawns, ignored, discredited, without much advantage, and therein lies the beauty of the journey. What counts is not the size of the piece, but the ability to keep moving, even when everything seems too difficult. The pawn moves one square at a time, slow, predictable, discreet. In a game where a few pieces cross the board in a single move, the pawn may seem insignificant, but it holds a deep secret: the power of constant progress. Leonardo da Vinci said that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, and perhaps no chess piece represents this better than the pawn. It doesn't impress with its strength, but with its constancy. It doesn't make flashy moves, but it's always on the move. A silent advance that, accumulated over time, can decide an entire game. We often expect change in our lives to happen suddenly, like a masterstroke. But most real transformations occur almost imperceptibly. A daily habit, a conscious choice, a small action repeated throughout the day. The mistake lies in believing that only the big turns matter. But what shapes our destiny, more often than not, are the small gestures we insist on repeating, even when no one is looking. And the pawn understands this better than any other piece. In chess, there is a concept called positional strategy. It teaches that the good player doesn't seek immediate advantages, but works to gradually build up a solid position. Grandmasters like Anatoly Karpov were experts at this. They didn't force the attack, they didn't rush into it. They just slowly adjusted their pieces, subtle movements, a little advance here, a little pressure there, and suddenly victory seemed inevitable. The opponent didn't realize the danger until it was too late. That's how the pawn plays. And that's how life is often won. This idea of subtle and constant progress leads us to something fundamental: the value of time. A person who reads just 10 pages of a book a day may not see the difference in a week, but if they keep up the habit, they will have read dozens of books over the course of a year. Someone who saves small amounts of money every month may not notice any changes in a short time, but years later, they will have built up a stability that many will never achieve. And that's the secret of the pedestrian. He doesn't depend on haste, speed, or immediate brilliance. His strength lies in his silent regularity. It advances one square at a time, always steadily, and it is this almost invisible advance that, in the end, can decide the fate of an entire game. In life, this kind of progress is the most powerful, because it happens away from the eyes of others. It doesn't attract attention. It doesn't generate applause or headlines, but it moves forward. And when it finally reveals itself, it's impossible to ignore. The pawn is that discreet presence that gradually transforms the landscape of the game. And he teaches us a rare lesson. Sometimes the best move is to wait. In a world where everything is immediate, where people demand results yesterday, the pawn reminds us that there is wisdom in patience. In chess, experienced players often keep a pawn still for several turns. They wait for the right moment, watch their opponent's position, wait for the pieces to move so that the advance can take place at the ideal moment. A hasty move can mean defeat. In the same way, in life, making decisions without maturity or vision can put us in fragile situations. A project needs time to mature. A relationship needs space to grow. Our dreams require solid construction, made with care, listening, and perception. Confucius said that it doesn't matter how slowly you go, as long as you don't stop. This is one of the pedestrian's most valuable messages. He knows he can't run. He knows he doesn't have the agility of the other pieces. But he also knows that if he keeps going, he'll reach the end of the board. And when he does, everything changes. That piece ignored at the beginning becomes the most powerful. What was small becomes decisive. But this transformation only happens because, from the very first move, the pawn has understood that true power does not lie in speed, but in constancy. The world doesn't belong to those who run the fastest, but to those who don't give up walking. We live in times when all changes are expected to be grandiose. We want revolutions, spectacular turns, instant results. But great transformations almost always begin invisibly. A new thought, a silent decision, a daily repetition, and the pawn is the symbol of this. He doesn't move forward because others applaud. He moves forward because he knows where he wants to go. And this awareness is what strengthens him. How can the pedestrian mentality be applied in everyday life? The first thing is to understand that real progress isn't always immediately visible. When someone starts training every day, for the first few weeks their body doesn't change visibly. But over time, it changes. It's the same with any habit: learning a language, studying for an exam, investing in a relationship. At first, nothing seems to happen, but something is being built up inside. It's like the root of a tree growing into the ground before the trunk appears. The pawn advances silently, but the basis of its power lies precisely in this invisible construction. Another valuable concept in chess is promotion. When the pawn reaches the last rank, it can transform itself into any piece, and it almost always chooses to become a queen. This possibility of transformation represents something profound. It doesn't matter where you started, but where you're going. Nobody is born complete. No one is born strong. But everyone has the capacity to grow, to change, to reinvent themselves. The pawn reminds us that our initial limitations do not define our destiny. What does is our movement, our intention, our perseverance. But there is one essential detail in this journey. No pawn reaches the end alone. On the board, an isolated pawn, one without support in the adjacent columns, has little chance of success. It needs protection. It needs cover. It needs the support of other pieces to move forward. And in life, this is no different. No growth path is truly solitary. We need mentors, friends, a community to encourage us, to help us see what we can't on our own. Because true advancement isn't just individual, it's also built on the bonds we choose to cultivate along the way. We need mentors, friends, and a support network. Just as the pawn in chess depends on the protection of other pieces to keep moving forward, we also need people who believe in us, who support us in difficult times and remind us of our value when we forget. Sometimes this support can come in the form of a friendly word, unexpected advice, or even the simple fact of knowing that someone is walking beside us. And it is this presence, discreet but constant, that can make the difference between being caught in the middle of the road or making it to the end of the board. And this journey leads us to a final powerful lesson: the importance of strategic sacrifice. In chess, many pawns are sacrificed to pave the way for a more forceful attack, to disorganize the enemy's defense, or to create a distraction that makes victory possible. The pawn accepts this role because it understands that sometimes a momentary loss is the price of a greater conquest. And in life, it's no different. There are times when we need to give up something apparently secure in order to follow a path more in line with what we really want. Maybe it's quitting a job that offers stability but robs us of joy. Maybe it's giving up certain comfortable but harmful habits to make room for a new lifestyle. Sometimes it's necessary to give up a relationship that is no longer flourishing in order to grow as an individual. The important thing is to realize that not every loss is a failure. Often, it is the decisive move in our evolution. Ryan Holiday, a contemporary author who revived Stoic philosophy, wrote a striking phrase: "The obstacle is the path." And that's the essence of what the pawn represents. He encounters challenges at every step. The path ahead is never clear. There are constant threats. There is risk in almost every move. And yet, he moves forward. He can't retreat. He can't get around the problem with an elegant leap like the horse. But even so, he chooses to continue, because every obstacle overcome brings him closer to his goal. And perhaps it is precisely this simplicity that makes the pawn so powerful. It doesn't need many resources to win. It just needs to keep moving. The truth is that we are all pawns at some point in our lives. We start at the bottom, without many options, surrounded by limitations, often discredited. But that doesn't mean we're condemned to remain in that position. On the contrary, the pawn is living proof that with strategy, patience, and consistency, we can reach the top. We can transform ourselves. We can break away from the limitations that the world has imposed on us, or that we ourselves believe exist, because someone's value lies not in where they started, but in how far they had the courage to go. So the next time you feel like you're moving too slowly, that your steps are too small to make any difference, remember the pawn. Remember that it starts out as the smallest piece, but has within it the potential to become the greatest force in the game. Remember that the secret is not to look big from the start, but to never stop moving forward. Because in chess, as in life, the winner is not the one who starts with the most power, but the one who refuses to give up. And now, if you've made it this far with me, congratulations. That already shows that something in this story has touched you in some way. Perhaps because deep down we've all felt like pawns, small, forgotten, trapped within our own limits. But now you know, it doesn't matter how we started. What matters is how we continue. And if you keep moving forward, however slowly, however afraid, you too can reach the end of your board. You too can transform. The next move is yours. By the way, tell me in the comments, what was the most important lesson you took away from this reflection? I really want to know what this story has awakened in you. And if this video made sense to you, leave a like. It really helps the channel to keep bringing you content like this. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. It's a simple step, but part of the strategy. Every video you watch here is another step forward on this journey. Oh, and before you go, there are 2 videos here on the screen. I could tell you what they're about, but I'd rather leave the mystery in the air. Choose one of them. It might be just what you need to hear today. The game continues, and the next move is yours.